I'm Rachel McCrum, and I'm here to talk with Isabelle Picard, Eden Robinson, and Drew Hayden-Taylor about transcending genre, contemporary Indigenous fiction this morning for 45 minutes. We only have 45 minutes. Drew's just been telling me about a 4-hour radio conversation he had in New Zealand, so 45 minutes, Drew. That's what I'm saying. This activity is offered by Kwahiatonhk and the Maison de la littérature as part of the 13th First Nations Bookfair, a TELUS presentation in collaboration with the CN, Innergex Renewable Energy, Hydro-Québec, les Caisse Desjardins de Wendake, OHWIHSTA, that might be a word, and OKT Law. Produced by Kwahiatonhk, the 2024 edition is made possible thanks to the financial support of the Canada Council for the Arts, the Government of Canada, the Government of Quebec, the SODEC, the City of Quebec, and Wendake. I have to say that at the start every time. I'll very briefly introduce our writers, more briefly than your impressive records allow, I have to say, and then we'll get straight into it. So we have Isabelle Picard, originally from Wendake. Isabelle Picard is a Wendat ethnologist, lecturer, columnist, analyst, speaker, consultant, trainer, and author. She studied at Laval University, wrote Wendake's first cultural policy, then worked to implement the Wendat Language Revitalization Project. She's a regular columnist for La Presse, and became the first advisor on Indigenous affairs to the Société Radio-Canada. She has published the Niche trilogy for children's books, which have just been translated into English, which I didn't know before coming on this panel, which we're going to get into, and 2 novels for adults in 2024, L'homme au du visage and Des glaçons comme du verre. Please put your hands together for Isabelle Picard. Eden Robinson. Eden Robinson is the daughter of a Haisla father and Heiltsuk mother. She grew up in Kitimat village, a reserve on the northwest coast of BC. Eden Robinson has won national and international acclaim for her dark Gothic fiction, we're going to get onto that, including Traplines, Monkey Beach, Blood Sports, and the Trickster trilogy. A round of applause, please, for Eden Robinson. She's just sharpening the attention. And finally, Drew Hayden-Taylor, an Anishinaabe/Ojibwe, I got told it could go either way, ambidextrous. Thank you for clarifying that. From the Curve Lake First Nations in Ontario, Drew Hayden-Taylor has been an award-winning playwright with over 20 plays to his name. That shouldn't be past tense. Is an award-winning playwright with over 20 plays to his name? Okay, has been, but might again be in future, who knows? Past and future tense, all tenses possibly, with over 20 plays to his name, journalist, writer, 7 non-fiction books, 7 collections of fiction and novels, television script writer, documentary filmmaker, showrunner, and artistic director of Native Earth Performing Arts. His most recent documentary, The Pretendians, is currently available on CBC, and his most recent novel is Cold, which we'll get on to, which is coming out in a French edition next autumn with Éditions à Lire. So, welcome, all of you. It's a pleasure and an honor to speak to you. So, I wanted to set the scene. I was preparing for this panel, and I was reading your books. I was reading Cold, I was reading Monkey Beach, which I hadn't read before. I was reading Des glaçons comme du verre with Isabelle. And I was out in a house where our nearest neighbours are a kilometre away, and I'm out there on my own because my partner's in Montreal. I have a cat, but she's fat and grey and is comforting but useless. And it's between Halloween and solstice. It's the darkest time of the year. And I'm reading these books. And I'm wondering, did you intend to scare the reader? Where does fear come into these books and what they're writing about? So we have Monkey Beach, which is talking about Sasquatch and actually the Sasquatch aren't the scary ones in Monkey Beach. And then in Cold, we've got the big bad. So please, when you're writing this and dealing with these supernatural creatures, where does fear come into it?
Well, my major fear is nobody will buy the book. But sitting down and writing this, I I wasn't, like, it's so hard to answer questions like this because I've never taken a writing course in my life. And so I just sit down and tell the story. I don't come into it with sort of a knowledge of the nuances of putting it together as it was, because I'm also told it's a police procedural, all these different things. I just try and be logical with the storytelling, and I let the story worry about scaring people. I was just concerned and focused on getting the story down accurately. I wasn't saying I'm going to make this part scary. I figured the story would take care of that. I believe stories are creations within themselves, spirits within themselves, and if you respect the story will respect you.
Okay. Eden, what about you?
I never think my stories are scary or dark. Usually I'm caught up in what's happening, and I'm very concerned about things that my editor thinks that I should be ignoring.
Like what?
And focusing on other things.
Okay.
Like timelines.
Okay.
My mind is very non-linear, so fitting into linear narratives has always been a struggle.
Yeah.
That's very odd. I'm a very linear writer. Start at letter A, end at letter Z.
Let me tell you about starfish.
Oh, please tell us about starfish. What?
Like, there's this place in Antarctica where there was an extirpation event where all the starfish were exterminated. And the ones that fill that void, that ecological void, have mutated in such interesting ways. Like, there's one that made its arms stiff. So it's like it's walking on all these stilts. So I can go on for hours.
So fascinated.
If there's any marine biologists out there.
I love it. I just want to come back. So I love this idea then that it's really driven by the story and where the story is going and whatever needs to come into the story to push the narrative forward, really. So a narrative more so than character, would you say, or?
Oh, I'm definitely a character-driven. Yeah, I've always been fascinated by the way people work. I'm a horrible eavesdropper. I used to take the bus from home to UBC, and if there was a couple fighting on the bus, I would go and sit right behind them.
What was going on? And then that makes its way into the book, so that becomes the idea for something
I love
to propel
listening
it.
to the way people argue. I love listening to the way people negotiate. It's especially amusing to me, like, when parents are negotiating with their toddlers.
Yeah. And so, but that's fascinating then that it starts from a place of character and a situation, and then whatever the context is, or as I say, these stories, because I'm interested, Drew, your first novel, I think, The Night Wanderer, was sort of subtitled A Native Gothic Novel. And Eden, I know the word Gothic gets given to you a lot. It's Northern Gothic and Native Gothic, and does Gothic mean anything to you in that sense? I know you share a birthday with Edgar Allan Poe, which is delightful.
And Dolly Parton.
And Dolly Parton. What a mix.
And Janis Joplin.
I have Gollum, but we'll get on to that.
Princess Di.
Brilliant. Isabelle, anyone famous sharing your birthday?
What did you say?
Anyone famous who shares your birthday? No, okay, we'll have to do some digging.
Sorry, I have to speak in the microphone.
But so this idea of Gothic, is that useful? Was that something that was useful and now isn't? How does that?
For context, as a teenager, I was a goth. So that
Many
dark,
of us were.
a very, very emo goth. I didn't realize how scary that was to my parents until I was much older and saw like my younger cousins being very moody.
Okay.
But yeah, I always loved Gothic stories. So I was quite pleased when it was applied to Monkey Beach. I didn't think of it as a Gothic novel because it didn't have like the classic tropes. There was no like brooding buildings or lovers going across the heath. But it was that same sort of claustrophobic.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
that for me made it Gothic.
Made it Gothic.
More the mildly ominous landscape.
Yeah, but in it, because it's quite a Eurocentric term in some ways.
Yes.
Gothic. It's it's an architecture. It's a period of time. You think Frankenstein. You're thinking sort of the Romantics and running around and all that sort of, and there is fear in it. I mean, the Gothic novels were designed to. There was a mystery and there was a fear in it. So to transpose that then to what is here and the traditional stories becomes an interesting slant.
And because
on
we're a
that.
fishing community, like some of the biggest fears would be the different way people drown.
Oh, the seals passage was something else. Yeah, I love seals. I loved seals, shall we say past tense, but yeah.
Well, my dad's favorite bedtime stories to me were instruction manuals and explaining as-built. And mom's favorites, like the stories I wanted her to tell me most were like the way different people drown.
Yeah. Wow. you were built to be a Gothic teenager. Isabelle, then when you're looking at something like Niche, which are for children, and you're bringing in the supernatural elements, how does that fit in we've heard about starting from story, we've heard about starting from character. For you, how does that fit together, and particularly writing more for children?
In Niche, I talk a lot about the territory. So to me, to talk about the territory, within talking about the legends, the mythology that is from that territory, it doesn't make sense. So in the first book of Niche, there's that legend of the Wolverine, which is an Innu legend. And to me, as an ethnologist, it's really important to tell about that mythology, about those legends, about that world vision that Indigenous people have. In Quebec, we're a little bit behind the rest of Canada regarding those things. So to me, it's still, when I'm doing that, it's like if I'm teaching a little bit, but like if I'm opening doors, like different kind of doors, because what we learn in the history program at school, it's longhouses, teepees, and then all the way up to 1750, and after that there's nothing. There's nothing really about our own ways of seeing life, of seeing our universe, imaginary. There's nothing about that. So the only way we have to do that as an author is within the books. So to me, it's capital that I can do that within all the books that I'm writing. Actually, it's another way to communicate with the people who are going to read the books.
And why so just when you said Quebec is kind of behind in these stories,
well, that's what
why do you think so, or?
Why? That's a big question. Well, like I said, even today, like in the history program, we're still teaching longhouses, teepees. And then after that, maybe in grade 8, a little bit about residential schools, but that's about it. So there's a lot of education to be made first to the teachers that are going to teach, so we have to start from there. But it's kind of new that we have some Indigenous writer here. It maybe 15 years ago, like it's not that long ago that we do have Indigenous people that are writing. I remember my first
published
as well. Because the first time I sent the first book I sent, that was a youth book that I sent to a publisher was 20 years ago, and it was refused everywhere. And the reason why it was refused, people are not ready for that. That's the reason I had. So it's kind of new here, and we have to do some
encouragement.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk about. So I'm fascinated by Two Falls, the video game. So Isabelle, you were the script writer, I think we can say, for a video game from a Quebec-based studio, and the game is called Two Falls and also has a name in Innu.
Don't ask me.
Okay. was really hoping for that. I'm not a video game player, I have to say, by any means. I was explaining my brother in Belfast is a designer, so we've had a chat about this. But my understanding is it's set in 1665 in Quebec. You can play either as a young French fille du roi, so a girl from France who's been brought over, who is, depending on what the motivation is, has escaped France at this time. There's a shipwreck. And you can play as her, who's arriving very much in the territory as being foreign, or you can play as a young Innu hunter who's grown up in the forest. And from what I've seen, the gameplay, how it looks completely changes depending on which character you're playing. So the forest is threatening and unknown to Jean, the fille du roi, but Maican, the hunter, that he sees it very differently, and it's beautiful, and it's sort of quite golden. And so this idea of writing for video games and storytelling within video games, and that idea of engaging people really from a first-person perspective, but also giving them a degree of agency, how was that to then think through writing this and engagement? Because I think engagement seems to be a theme.
Yeah. Well, see, that story is, again, to me, it was important to bring, because we always tell the colonization of the province of Quebec from the colonizer's perspective. And for once, we were in a pub, and the owner of the gaming company told me, hey, we should do a story about Indigenous people, like how it was when we first came here, and what was your perspective? And I'm like, oh, let's do it. So it started like that. And to me, it was, if we want to bring people back in 1665, we have to bring them back to old values that sometimes we lost in translation, at a point, but some are still here. We had to bring them in the universe we had back then. At first, it was called the Windigo. But we decided not to do that because of all the. Anyway, it's a bit complicated to explain, but there's a lot of involvement if you do that. So we decided not to go with that. But still, the spirit, that you have in the territory, that keeps the territory, that protects the territory. We wanted to have that, to kind of. Yeah. So to me, it's a beautiful medium in order to. Tell our vision, and our values, and probably how it was before the colonizers came.
Because it's just that moment, really, when
it is.
Exist.
And probably something that we, as Jeanne is the fille du roi that you were talking about, but how did she see things, when she first arrived? We don't think about that. Everything is installed now, but in the beginning, how it was, like how fragile, how, I'm looking for the word in English, but anyway, how was she? She was a little bit worried. She was, how was it? Vulnerable? That's
vulnerable, yeah.
Yeah. So for once, it shows, it's a different perspective that I really like.
No, it might be the thing that gets me into video games. You never know. Drew, I wanted to come back to Cold, because I did really enjoy reading Cold, even if I only read it in daylight hours, usually early in the morning. But one of the things that I loved, as well as the story, and it is cracking, please do go buy it. Allay Drew's Fears here. It's fabulous, and it's very cinematic, and you'll see why at some point. But there's also a lot of commentary in it in terms of these types of stories. There's some brilliant shout-outs to other writers who are publishing. Will Bryce's Wind of the Crusted Snow gets a shout-out. And at one point, quite early on, so there's a lecturer character called Elmore Trent who does a lot of this commentary. Is he a stand-in for the author in some ways, or
no?
Possibly.
No.
Not at all.
In fact, I go out of my way. The character she's talking about, Elmore Trent, is a professor of Indigenous literature, and so all scattered through the book, he's making comments to various people about this book and that book and what he thinks of that book. And I'm always bending over backwards, telling people that's not my perspective. It's the character's perspective. I think most of them are positive. One book he doesn't really care for, but his student really loves it, and I try to give it that sort of fair shake. But no, it's not my opinions, unless there are positive reviews.
That's an excellent excellent disclaimer there. But, okay, so leaving aside the specific books that are referenced in it, and I think it's really interesting because there does seem to be this continuity. You know, we've got Monkey Beach. I've seen it linked to Bad Cree in recent times. We have Moon of the Crusted Snow Cold. Are you as Indigenous writers who, you know, there's this combining of the spiritual elements, of the human elements, the psychological. Are you talking to each other in these books? Are you influencing each other?
There are conversations in books all the time, and I think the comparison gets made a lot just because there's a lot of crow work between Bad Cree and
Crow work.
I've done crow work.
I was talking to David Robertson last year as well with the theory of crows.
Yes,
So I said crow.
yes, we're all doing crow work.
You're not an Indigenous author unless you put a crow in it.
It's union roles.
Thank you for the insight.
Yeah, you also have to mention Elvis.
Next novel.
I think it's wonderful. Like when I was first starting out, there wasn't the depth and the breadth of Indigenous writers, and so the conversations were very muted. But now that it's just exploded the amount of people getting published. So you get all these different conversations happening and all these different reflections.
It used to be that what I refer to as the contemporary Indigenous literary renaissance exploded in, I think, the 80s and the 90s. Prior to then, there wasn't a lot of Native literature being published, but then suddenly there was this theater, Thompson Highway's The Red Sisters, and then there was Lee Miracle, Jeanette Armstrong, Maria Campbell, etc. And there was this explosion of books coming to the First Nations community, but the vast majority of them were dark, depressing, bleak, sad, and angry. And that's to be expected, because when an oppressed people get their voice back, they're going to write about being oppressed. So that was coming in. It's a healing thing. Thompson even had a saying, before the healing can take place, the poison must be exposed. So that's what was happening. And then gradually, as the poison was exposed and the healing began, Native writers began to explore different other methods of telling our stories above and beyond what was called the trauma porn. So, what is it? Daniel Heath Justice did his own version of The Lord of the Rings, a trilogy of books about dwarves and elves and swords and sorcery from his unique Indigenous perspective. Kateri Akawinzi-Dam compiled, edited, and published a collection of international Indigenous erotica that I like to think of as 50 Shades of Red. Nice. And then I did a vampire novel, and other people are doing different, there's a whole, science fiction is the big push right now in many Indigenous communities.
Because I think it was, I've completely forgotten, but the follow-up to Moon of the Crusted Snow, which is Moon of the Turning Leaves, thank you, is that, and which is phenomenal, but actually strips away some of the supernatural elements that were so present in Moon of the Crusted Snow, and really turns more to, no, this is futurism, this is, and it's, I can't think, post-apocalyptic, because you can't really call it dystopian. It's doing something else other than dystopia, which to my really surprised me when I read it. You've all read it, so I mean, how did that turn work for you?
Yeah, it's the most gentle. Yeah, everything's so thoughtful, and the way that the characters are working through this huge, societal shift is very much from a WOB perspective. That's the it's just that was wonderful.
Right, and Sherry Demerlane also has done her own post-apocalyptic type of storytelling too.
Yeah. So this is I love this going to the next step. Then it's and it keeps evolving. It's evolving so quickly, which is fascinating.
Well, tell her about your band office comedy.
Oh, please tell me.
For many years, I've been trying to write a trashy band council romance. And I've hit a hiccup because someone on council had the affair that I wrote about, and it exploded all over Facebook. So I can't use it. Yeah, and my mother is an incredible genealogist. And her special gift is remembering all the scandals attached to all the names.
Sounds like a co-writer.
So we worked really hard to have an affair that no one on council had before.
Good luck.
Exactly, and now that it's happened, I had to do a rethink of
you can't get away with, this was in no way influenced by true events. And
I wrote this before you had the affair. No, it's quite inconvenient.
How dare they affect your career?
And I can't. So there's a couple of plot points that turn on the very specific way this affair happened.
Okay.
So I have to
move away.
Yeah, I have to. Well, when I told Dad that what I was thinking of writing, he was like, "Well, I've always loved Vancouver Island."
Time to move. But that's it. Like in a more serious way, but it is very serious, Eden. You can't write about them. Sorry, I feel like I'm about to take something, and I don't mean this to be glib. And I really don't mean, because Isabelle, I'm going to come to Des Glaçons comme tu verras, which is a beautiful book and a very real book. And one of the things that really touched me in it was the fact that you'd written. It's connected to the story of your grandparents, but it's based on conversations that you could not have with, your parents about their lives because the details were either missing or too difficult. And so you ended up writing a book to fill in would it be fair to say, to fill in the conversation?
Kind of, yeah. It's a tough process, actually. It's a book about the 60 Scoop. In Quebec, the 60 Scoop I believe it's the first book that it's really talking about it. So it's something that it's quite new here. I was telling you the difference between Quebec and the rest of Canada, so that's new. People know about residential schools, but they don't know about the 60 Scoop. And actually, they don't know that it happened right here in Wendake, because Wendake, I'm on the radio and the TV quite often, and people were asking me, "Are you the daughter or the granddaughter of a survivor of the residential schools?" And I'm like, yes, but no. So it was always tough, and I told myself, well, you know what? One day I'm going to explain what's the story of my family. And that took place right here, like 15 minutes from here, and people cannot believe that it happened in Wendake, which was seen like kind of a protected community because we used to speak French, for such a long time, and we, our culture became Francophone or Québécois or Canadian very fast. We're over there since 1697, so we had to work a lot to bring our culture and our language back. Now we're pretty good, but when I grew up, it was tough. There was a lot of pieces of the puzzle that was missing, actually. And so the only way I knew that something happened within the family of my dad, because it was not a family that was really close, and that's really rare in a community like Wendake. Everybody is really close, everybody knows each other, but there was always something, that I felt. And when I grew up, I heard here and there that my dad went to a residential school, but non-Indigenous one, to an orphelinat. How do you say that? Orphanage. Yeah. So some people, one of my uncle was, they wanted to adopt, to have him adopted by a non-native family. So I heard all of those stories, but to me it was always little pieces here and there, very sad, a lot of a big burden, and so when I was 44 years old, I was in the bush, and I felt my grandfather somehow, that I never knew, and it's like if he was giving me like that, write our story. I don't know, it was really mystical, and I said, okay, that's what I'm gonna do, and I went to speak to my oldest auntie, And I asked her all the questions. She was so generous. I felt like she wanted to tell the story. It was time. Because all the grandchildren didn't know about that, and the great-grandchildren didn't know about it, and we felt there was something missing. So I did a lot of research with her at the Archives Quebec, at the archives of my community. I found out a lot of things. But there's still some pieces missing today. But you know what? I'm very happy because that book, my family read it, and then they came back to me and they said, oh, now I'm going to tell you. So if it just started a conversation, well, if it's just that, for me, it's really good. So we were saying it's like a therapy, like we're healing through writing sometimes, and that's a good example of it.
And that function of opening the conversation, not necessarily not needing to fill in all the blanks, but to give it a start and a reaction.
Yes, and to other Indigenous too that lived that 60s coup in Quebec. And, it's like if they were invalidated, that's a word. So with that, it's like we recognize your story, we recognize what happened. And I had a lot of testimonies from those Indigenous people all over Quebec. It's so important what you're telling in that book, and to me it's really, really, it's a good thing. Okay, I'm not going to cry.
It's beautiful. It's a really, really beautiful read.
Thank you.
And I know, the social worker is called Blanche Lejoie, which just feels like a nice little elbow dig. White joy. I appreciated that as a wee sideward sweep.
Yeah,
so it is.
la joie, the joy.
Yes. So we've talked about filling in the gaps there. What are the other stories to tell? Do you think? Do you see science fiction is coming? We're talking about post-apocalyptic. What are the next stories for you to tell? What's the gaps? I'll start with you, Hayden.
Oh, I'm the next one.
Apart from the band office romance.
The next one is a fantasy novel.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's Heislas in space. It's West Coast, but on a different planet.
Nice.
It's fantasy with a fig leaf of science fiction.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's just a fig leaf.
Why does fantasy need the fig leaf of science fiction?
Because I'm a big geek. And space exploration is looking a lot less Star Trek and a lot more fur tradey.
Yeah.
So it's
Fur trading.
lots of monolithic corporations.
Yeah.
It's looking less so
alternative futures, but drawing on what might have been from the past. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Well, Dad loved to wake me up at 3 a.m. to tell me stories, because if he was awake, everyone has to be awake. So, I found that I really miss those.
Yeah.
I miss, like, he was a storyteller in the traditional Heisla sense. Okay. So the stories that he told me were our traditional stories. And he loved supernatural creatures. He loved, that's where I got my love of tricksters and Sasquatches, Bagwes. And so I wanted to put them, I wanted them to have a place in fiction, but, we're so often put in the past. I thought, let's go really far into the future and see what happens.
And what happens to those supernatural creatures? Because if my understanding is are they linked to place? They're linked to the land? So what happens if it's a different land?
Some of them are linked to place, and some of them are linked to families. And but that was one of the questions. Like in potlatching cultures, we have supernatural creatures that gave us a lot of power, and we had very complex relationships that the potlatch system was built on. What would happen if you moved us to another planet?
Okay.
Like would they follow? Would they leave Earth? Like, just random things.
No spoilers.
No spoilers.
Look for this book to come at this point. I think that's because it's interesting.
Oh, I'm gloriously late in delivery.
Okay. We'll wait, Hayden. We'll wait. bated breath. Because that's one of the things about cold that I find, fascinating and also terrifying is the big bad. I'm not saying the word. So it appears in the city, whereas where you don't expect it, because it's, we've heard of those stories of it being so much a creature of the cold and the forest, and then the fact that it moves from city to city, that is not a spoiler. So what did that feel like to bring it out of its habitat?
I love, first of all, a number of things. I'm constantly find it eerie how similar our careers are parallel. Because
Twinsies!
Well, first of all, to answer your question, right? My first novel was a native vampire novel, right? Where I decided to take a character from European mythology and indigenize it. And then my next novel was about the trickster. And then I did this novel, which is about the W creature, right?
Yeah.
And I did a collection of my science fiction short stories. And my new novel,
It's a band office romance.
No, it's a casino romance. Well, actually, it's not that far off. My next novel that's coming out is about, I've decided to culturally appropriate and indigenize a 1930s German beer hall musical by Bertolt Brecht and Kurt Weill. It was called The Rise and Fall of the City of Mahagoni. It's now called Sucker Falls. So anyways, but this is again where it gets really eerie. I am 4,000, maybe 6,000 words away from finishing a novella of 3 kids who dimension hop. who build this thing. It's so long to go into, but it's basically a magic wigwam, and it the whole multiverse thing and the way it's described within the book is the enclosure, the wigwam, helps them jump from one line of reality to another line of reality, so they call it portaging.
If anybody's looking for their next doctoral thesis, the parallel literary careers of Drew Hayden-Taylor and Adrian Robinson are what you need to be looking for. And I'm hoping to make it into a series of short stories.
And Motorcycles and Sweetgrass did have kind of a band office romance.
It was the chief, yeah. True. So, yeah, there's a lot of similarities.
Amazing. I'm going to pull it back to this thing because it does, the supernatural beast being taken, beasts, not creatures. And I love, there was something you'd said about Two Falls where there was this switch of the creature being taken. I'm really superstitious. I'm Irish. We believe in this stuff. I am not saying it.
I know.
And I live in the woods.
Even when I said it, I was like, oh.
But I love, you'd said, there was this idea of the Eurocentric view where it's, there's the cannibalistic and there's a lot of violence and a huge amount of fear versus there are lessons to be learned about respect and protection of nature coming through with this. And then in Cold, would it be fair to say there's something linked to, I'm trying not to spoil it, but linked to the psychology of
well, I tried
the person that it's inhabiting?
I tried to explain that it's been, it's known as a creature of the wilderness because that's where it lived, and all the people it would overcome were people who lived up there or up there. But in this particular case, it's a character who's up there and then gets rescued and comes into the city and brings it with her. Yes. Right? So, when I was doing the vampire novel, the thing is, there's so many novels about vampires, and vampires, depending on which story you go to, have so many different characteristics. And Dracula could fly, could turn into a wolf, could turn into like a mist, all these different things, right? And then you've got other ones where it's just like a virus, where it just makes you super strong, live forever, and allergic to sunlight. And there's all sorts of variations in between.
She's sparkly.
Yeah, I know exactly. Not allergic to the sun. So when I did my vampire one, I had to pick out the characteristics I wanted to use and play with it. Same with the trickster story I did, and the one with the creature in it. I had to figure out what, when you're creating a universe, you can bend some of the rules and as I like to say, Taylorize them. And so that's basically what I did. I sort of took the elements of the legends that I knew and sort of, I don't see why I cannot take that creature and put him in downtown Toronto and let it run amok.
Yes. And see what happens, and maybe go to space. We will find out. Our time is drawing to a close, and so I'm going to say thank you very much to all of you. That was a huge amount of ground covered. I'm also just looking for my closing notes, which I need to say, which are not here. Oh, there they are. So, ladies and gentlemen, we would ask you please not to, oh, they've just gone. Oh, they've gone. I know what I need to say. We would ask you please not to detain our authors as they are coming off stage, although you may have many things that you want to ask them because they are needed next door in the Moran Centre to go and sign books. But please go and visit them there. Buy all these wonderful books. Buy Cold, buy, well, Monkey Beach and whatever else we've got of Eden Robinson's coming there. Buy the Niche trilogy and Des Glaçons comme tu verras from Isabelle Picard. And in the you look like you want to say something, Eden.
Yes, I have a T-shirt with my face on it, and I don't think I ever want to use it. That seems a little douchey. It's an extra large. Would anyone like it? Oh,
yes. So can we see it before it gets given out to the?
This was a fundraiser by the Marilyn Slett.
I can hold the other side of it. So. Yes. Yes. Do you want to read what's the words that are written on it?
Her story.
Well done for getting your hand up on this.
Her story and mine is storyteller. I'm the green corner over here, and because you said you were superstitious, okay, this is every single protection thing in a scrunchie. So it's cedar and sage and sweetgrass. And that's for you. Okay, the last thing I have. Okay, this is an Indigenous company. I can't. Squalin? Squalene, rainforest tea. So this is also medicine, but it's quite tasty. It's blackberry, devil's club, and lemon balm. Would anyone like a? Okay, there you go. Come on up.
Come and get your T-shirt and your tea. Eden Robinson gives presents at readers. I'm just saying, guys. I'm just saying. It's your tea, and would you like to come and get you? Would you like to give this person her T-shirt?
Hey.
Wow. Round of applause.
Hey.
Wonderful. This has been so fun. Please go next door to the Moran Centre, buy all their books. You can have a chat over the signing table, and finally put your hands together, please, for Eden Robinson, Drew Hayden Taylor, and Isabelle Picard.